you'll find no action will be taken on these laws until after the election. You're going to knock on the door at 5 o'clock in the morning. The police have heard you've got police online monitoring what's been said on these podcasts. You're arrested for hate speech.
Both sides of politics joining forces to impose more censorial control over the population. Is that a cynical interpretation or not?
I was standing up in Parliament calling out Daniel Andrews, Berejiklian, Palaszczuk as abusing human rights. When he's little, he was progressing well. He was starting to say a few words, and then he had his routine sort of vaccines, and he never spoke a word since. That's one of the great reasons why I was very suspicious about the vaccines, because I've seen it with my own son. Firstly, what we've got to do, you've got to install an entrepreneurial spirit in the kids. You've got to make sure that that they can see that they can achieve. You should be cutting all this woke nonsense out of the schools, right? Teach the kids about the history of Western civilization. There's hundreds of bureaucrats, hundreds of them, on salaries of $500,000 or more. If most people knew the waste and the over-expenditure in Canberra, the small businesses that I work with and guys that were in the trades and bits and pieces, they would vomit. You change the mindset and the culture of the society, and when I say change it, you change it dramatically for the worse.
I think Australia is dying from within.
Well, I hate to say that, I think there's a lot of truth to that.
Craig Kelly, welcome to the studio.
Hey, great to be with you, Fred. Great, all the best new venture. Great to be here in this new studio as well.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and you've got a new role, Libertarian candidate for the New South Wales Senate.
That's right. It's been a bit of a journey there, but at this coming election, I joined the Libertarian Party. The party was always very close to probably the values that I had, probably more than many of the other parties. Yep. And I joined them and put my hand up, and it was a totally democratic process. Yep. I went up against 3 other candidates. We had a proper debate process and a proper membership voting, and thankfully I was successful in that membership vote. Oh, yeah,
that sounds so unlike the Liberal Party.
Well, it's a far cry from the Liberals and the other parties I've been involved in, where it was sort of at the Liberals was all factional deals and backroom deals, and I was just very fortunate. In 2010, when I was first elected as the Liberal MP for the candidate for the seat of Hughes, that the 2 other candidates, I did a bit of a Steve Bradbury, and sort of came through the middle sort of thing. And I remember someone asked me, "What faction are you in?" I don't know. How do you know what faction you're in? I didn't even know there were factions in the Liberal Party. Wasn't I in for a surprise?
I've got to give the viewers and the listeners a bit of an insight into Craig Kelly, the man. He's just turned up to my studio in a tiny little Holden Barina. It looks like he couldn't fit inside it. But anyway, you're not your standard sort of ambitious, greedy, career-minded politician, are you, mate?
Well, look, I had that opportunity at the Liberal Party. And during the COVID period, I just couldn't stomach the policies that they were putting in. And to me, the reason I joined the Liberal Party is because there's their belief in freedom, their belief in small government, their belief in get government out of your lives. That was the Liberal Party I joined. It was Tony Abbott. I was elected under. We used to march in the streets against the carbon tax. Yeah. They were the things that the Liberal Party has changed remarkably. In those years that I was there, but during.
How intense did it get? We'll get into the present very quickly, but how intense did it get when you were persona non grata within the party, but still representing the party in Parliament?
Well, look, it was, you're right. Look, I believe what we were doing during the COVID period was wrong. And I firstly started off, it was the, what I called the violation of the sanctity of the doctor-patient relationship. Yep. To me, one of the important things in a free society that distinguishes us from a totalitarian society is that we have doctors. You build up a relationship with your doctor. You go into the doctor's rooms. He closes the door, and you have a discussion, and you trust your doctor's judgment as he practices the art of medicine. But what we had during the COVID period, it was like the door would close, and there'd be a government bureaucrat there as well, sitting there in a chair because.
Telling the doctor what?
Telling the doctors what to say. A lot of these bureaucrats weren't even doctors. And they were telling the doctors, you can't say anything bad about the vaccine. And you can't say anything good about hydroxychloroquine or ivermectin, right? And if you do, we will suspend you. And the suspension process that they had from APRA was one of the most unjust things that I've ever seen. There was no duty. These doctors were basically, if they gave their true opinion based on the science and the evidence and what they were reading and the reports and medical studies coming through, and they were saying that, I think I should prescribe ivermectin. And my doctor did that for me. And that when they changed the rules, those doctors were struck off and basically they're suspended from working, and so we'll have a hearing down the track. And that years has gone by. Some of these doctors have waited years to have that hearing to clear their name. So the process became the punishment.
Let's talk about, because this is very topical, the Australian Human Rights Commission, having sat on its hands throughout the entire COVID lockdown and vaccines, has released a report. You've read the report?
I've read it. I read it last night. Look.
Well, let me ask you a specific question about it. It says that the Australian pandemic response was good and it saved lives.
Look, I would totally disagree, and I think the evidence and the science that we know shows that. Look, it was welcome that they said there were breaches of human rights, but where were these people 4 and 5 years ago? Right? I was standing up in Parliament calling out Daniel Andrews, Berejiklian, Palaszczuk as abusing human rights.
And Morrison for that.
And he was in it as well. So I called them all out. I called Daniel Andrews out on the steps of Parliament House. We had a rally, the biggest rally in our nation's history, in front of the Parliament House in Melbourne.
Was there.
The crowd, I could never forget the scenes of the crowd
down Martin Place.
As long as I live. Not Martin Place? What's it called in Melbourne? I'm not my Melbourne geography.
Spring Street.
No, Melbourne. Yeah.
Across
there.
Because I saw you do the same routine.
It was huge, and out there, I said Daniel Andrews is an abuser of human rights. And I was, I said in Parliament, I was, how dare you say these things? How terrible they are. And now, 4 years later, the Human Rights Commission has come out and say exactly the same thing. We needed the Human Rights Commission. This is why these government bureaucracies, most of them need to be closed down. Right? If they were doing their job, they would have been there on those very particular times when the human rights of Australians were being trampled upon.
Exactly.
Right? But where were they? They were hiding under their desk, didn't say anything. Now, we saw Australians that were told, unless you inject this substance into your body, you're not going to have a job. You'll be out on the streets. And the Human Rights Commission said nothing.
Craig, I think this report is just a psyop. For a start, there is clearly going to be another pandemic. Under whose orders we don't know. You might have a better idea of that than me. We'll get to that in a minute. But I want to read you a quote from the report. This is regarding ivermectin and so-called misinformation. There is a chapter, you saw it, on misinformation in this, and it says, quote, this is respondents to their survey, some felt that government messaging throughout the pandemic caused unnecessary fear and anxiety that ultimately led to divisions with families and communities. Well, pardon me, Craig, I think that was intentional.
Yes.
And for them to acknowledge that now, 5 years later, is, as you've already said, too little too late. But they aren't saying enough anyway. What they should be saying is that the government was the chief propagator of misinformation, and we can't allow this to happen again.
100% correct. And that's why, look, a lot of these bureaucracies are totally useless. The whole thing about having this International Declaration of Human Rights signed after World War II, the whole point of those regulations, I shouldn't call them regulations, they're principles of human rights that should belong to everyone. That's why I call it the Universal Declaration, right? Yeah. They're written for when difficult times are upon you. They're difficult when there's conflict or when there's, sort of like a mass psychosis going on to keep you. These are the guiding, the rail tracks of principles that you follow, right? They're not written for 5 years later when everyone's sitting down having tea and scones and it's all wonderful. They're there in the heat of the battle. Yeah. And in the heat of the battle, when we needed that Human Rights Commission, they were totally missing in action. So, look, I'd be quite happy, and I'm sure that's part of our libertarian policies, to take to the place with a chainsaw. I'd clean them all out, close the joint down, take their equipment and auction it all off.
Oh, well,
because they are
that's
completely
so
and
rare
utterly useless.
Well, that is music to the ears to a lot of my listeners, I'd have to say, Craig. How are we going to achieve that? Like, you're running for the Senate for New South Wales as a Libertarian. Give us, honestly, your odds of getting a seat and what will happen.
Yeah, look, it's going to be tough. We're probably a slight outsider at the moment, but we're in with a great chance. A very important thing that's happened over the last week is that we've come up with what we call a triple or joint ticket. So I've always argued after the disappointment of the last election that we've got all these minor parties, especially in the Senate, that are all on the Labor side. You've got Labor and the Greens, and there's not much else. But on the Liberal side, you've got the Liberals, and you've got the UAP, and you've got One Nation, you've got the Liberal Democrats, and you've got Family First, and you've got the Great Australia Party, and you've got the Freedom Party. So you've got all these other separate parties, right? Now, what that does, especially in the Senate, it fragments the vote.
Yep.
And because of the system that we have in the Senate, where it's optional preferential, where you can vote one and then your vote still counts. You don't have to preference out, right? A lot of people just simply don't understand how the preference system works. So we found a lot of the votes don't preference each other. So you get that fragmentation. You don't get the preferencing coming together. The preferences go over the place, and you end up with, like at the last election, we had, say, two, which would say One Nation, Pauline Hanson from Queensland, Ralph Babbitt from Victoria, when we should have had on the votes 6. We should have had one senator from each state going into that Senate.
Yeah.
So in every meeting I went to after the election campaign, people would come up to you and they'd say, you blokes have got to get your heads together, put your egos aside, and join together as one united force. And that was the message over and over and over again. Well, in the New South Wales, we've partly done it. Right? So what we've done in New South Wales with Gerard Rennick's People's First Party, and also what was the old IMOP party, they called the IMOP was Informed Medical Options Party. They've changed their name to the Heart Party. A lot of very good people, very committed people. Their strength is on medical freedom. Bodily autonomy, that is their strength. So with those two other parties, we are running a triple ticket in the Senate. So when people get their ballot paper in New South Wales, they'll have a box and they'll have our three parties all listed together underneath each other. Above the line, then we'll have 6 names below the line, and I'll be the number one of those 6 names.
Why can't you just... What? I mean, I know Gerard doesn't share libertarian principles, but why can't you just join forces?
Look, there's probably 95% of the stuff I agree with Gerard. And during the COVID period, Gerard was one of the probably almost the only Liberal. There was George Christensen from the National Party, but Gerard Rennick was the only Liberal that would give me any support or say, we've got to listen to Craig, give him a chance, let him have his say, sort of thing. Maybe there's something in what he's saying. He was the only Liberal that would do that, give me any support. And he was very much... And what did the Liberal Party do to him?
Kicked him out.
Yeah. So he had the number 3 spot. They kicked him down to as the sitting senator. They kicked him down from... So they've got 2 other people in the Senate. He was 3. They kicked him down to 4, which was an unwinnable spot. So they effectively kicked him out of Parliament, right? And I would think if anyone would objectively look at this Parliament, Gerard Rennick has been the standout senator. Right?
He's one of the greatest, yourself included, one of the greatest men to enter our federal politics, federal Parliament. I mean, his command of detail is extraordinary. Any scene where he's involved in Senate estimates is actually riveting television.
Because, see, this is the normal situation. Normally these bureaucrats can get in there and you've got these dumb politicians that don't know much more than the talking points they're given. And these bureaucrats can run rings around them, right? They know I've only got to hold out for 5 or 6 minutes sort of thing, or 10 minutes, and I'll snow them and I'll snow them and I'll spin sort of thing, right? That's where you need someone like Gerard that knows his stuff, that knows his details, that when they come back and give them bullshit, he can call out their bullshit. That's where normally they get away with it in these Senate estimates.
So you and Gerard are really frightening examples of what the Liberal Party seems to represent these days. Give us an insight or a description of what are these pernicious forces within the Liberal Party, and how did they get there?
Unfortunately, the Liberal Party has been structured where it's just divided into this factional mess. and everyone belongs to a faction, and your success is if you suck up that factional tree. So you'll get a position, a lowly position somewhere, and you might get a position in an MP's office or something, or on council or somewhere with and your job's to recruit people to branches, and look, this is crazy.
But even more sinister, Craig, I'm led to believe that these aren't factions these aren't political factions, they're more commercial.
Commercial, yeah. A lot of it's done on a commercial basis.
So these are getting people into politics for the benefits of lobbyists.
Well, remember Scott Morrison? When Scott Morrison, there's a Scott Morrison when he first joined the party and came along, right? Yeah. When he was first elected for the member of Cook, right, he went to join one of the local branches, and they rejected him. He was rejected from the branch. Like the future Prime Minister of the country, the future leader of the Liberal Party, was actually rejected from a branch because they thought he might be from another faction. Wow. I know you're looking stunned, but that's how bad it is. And even today, good people put their hands up and say, I'd like to join the Liberal Party. They fill their membership form out. They're no, sorry, you're rejected from our branch. Because
who's doing the rejecting?
Well, it's the people that control the branches. So that's what people said to me when I first went there. People said, "You hear this about? I control 3 branches." Hang on, what do you mean you control branches? How the hell does this work? And what it means? So each electorate has so many branches in it. Like my electorate had 7, and that's either a left-wing branch or a right-wing branch, right? And they're all fighting for control of each other, and the left wing takes dominance, and they then want all the executive positions, and they then get to vote on all the things. It is a complete and utter shit show.
Well, let's stay with the Liberal Party for a minute, because there's an election coming up, and I don't think... I told John Ruddock this last week, and I don't think he entirely agreed, but I'll say it again. I don't think Australia will survive another 3 years of Labor.
Well, look,
we do need the coalition to form government after this election, despite how lowly we think of their processes. How do you think it will pan out?
Well, firstly, you're right. Things are pretty grim. Now, if Labor get back in, they'll get back in. They're not going to have a majority.
Yeah.
They will need Greens and probably some of the Teals votes.
Can I just point out, this is the greatest irony of our system. So the electorate is going to shift to the right, and the elected members will shift to the left.
That's what's likely to happen.
How absurd.
So Albanese, I can't see how Albanese can win enough seats by himself.
No. Yep.
To form government. Right? Mm-hmm. So for him to stay Prime Minister, he's got to have the majority of votes on the floor of the Parliament to give him confidence and supply.
Yep.
So he'll have to go to Adam Banton, his Merry Green Men, and say, Adam, will you give us your votes for confidence and supply? And Adam will say, okay, yes, but here's my shopping list, Anthony. Yeah. I want you to do this, right? Yeah. Which is sort of like half of it would come out of the Communist Manifesto, right? What he wants, right? Yeah. And then there'll be the Teals want the same thing. They said, well, we'll give you our support, Anthony, but here's our shopping list. And wind turbines everywhere, except for their electorates, mind you, right? Except for their electorates, right? And mandates for electric cars and more subsidies and, all this virtue-seeking nonsense.
Yep.
That will be their shopping list.
Yep.
So Albanese will say, okay, well, if I agree to this, Craig,
I think the electorate understands this. I think the electorate is coming around to the realisation that unless there's a reasonable swing towards the coalition, we're going to be far worse off. If it's a repeat of Gillard and the Greens from 2010, then the country is screwed. So let's just gameplay it again.
Okay. Well, one of the lessons from 2010 is that when people go and vote at the poll, before they vote, they should be asking their federal member, in the event of a hung parliament, who will you give your vote to? Now, all these Teals have got to come clean. These Teals, they're so, virtue signalling and so transparency, and we're all for integrity and all these things. Well, if you want to be transparent, if you want integrity in politics, tell us before we vote, who are you going to back in the event of a hung parliament? And they won't say it because they know they're in Liberal electorates and they know they will back Albanese. And if they know they make that public, they will likely to lose their seats. So they would rather deceive their electorates, go quiet, not say anything, throw integrity, throw credibility out the window, to try and trick people to voting for them because they know in a hung parliament they're going to be right behind Albanese.
So let's say there is that the coalition does form government. What'll happen? Will Peter Dutton reveal a more robust, true liberal philosophy?
Well, look, I'd hope so, but some of the signs haven't been very good, I must admit.
He's been in Canberra too long, I think.
What did he say the other day? He said, his gut feeling is that Kevin Rudd should stay as ambassador in the USA. Now, that's right. You're right. You show, come on, Peter. Come on. Right?
Yeah, you don't think Trump wouldn't have... Trump would know that by now.
We need, as an Australian citizen, no matter what side of politics you are from, right, you want someone in that ambassador's office, right, that's got a direct line to the president, whoever it is. Now, if Biden had won, Rudd was the perfect man to be there because Rudd had, demonised Trump, and they knew that he was one of them, and he hated Trump's guts, and that he'd have a bit of an inside running sort of thing, right?
Yeah.
But the fact that Trump won, and you've had Kevin Rudd criticise him like viciously and very, very nasty sort of criticism, right? That makes it impossible for Rudd to have a good relationship with Trump. Yeah. So what should have been done? Albanese should have picked the phone up and said, Kevin, mate, I'm sorry. It's in the best interest of our nation. I've got to move you somewhere. I'll find you another, we could have found him another ambassador. I'm sure there's, Afghanistan or Iraq or somewhere like that would have been very good. We don't want Kevin back in Sydney, right? We don't want him back in Australia, right?
Could have given him Beijing.
Right, Beijing. Anywhere. North Korea might be good, or some Central African Republic might be a nice place for Kevin, right? But the last place as an Australian, forget it's Rudd and forget the US Labor, but his ability to have a good relationship with the President of the USA is zero. Yeah. Right? I want, like Joe Hockey did, I want my ambassador over there to be one of the president's golfing buddies. Right? I want my ambassador to have the president's phone number and have a chit chat about golf sort of thing in their golf game and say, look, mate, geez, we've got a problem down here, Yeah. Like remember, we're in a situation, we had a flotilla of Chinese subs, a fleet of Chinese vessels circling our country a week ago. Now, any of those Chinese vessels could have docked at any port in Australia, come down the gangplank and shot us like fish in a barrel. Now, the only thing that prevents that is our strength and our alliance with the USA. So you can't muck around with our alliance with the USA. You've got to have the best person in the job in Washington, and that ain't Kevin Rudd, right? And what does Peter Dutton say? You think he should stay there, Like, come on. Show a bit of spine, show a bit of backbone, and come out and say, Rudd should be recalled. Yeah. He hasn't done that. So that's why I greatly worry. Then you had the free speech situation, right? What did we see, this hate speech legislation?
Well, I think this is in the background. I think, Trump's better informed than most people realise. And I'm sure that Trump knows that free speech is on the canvas in Australia. Why would he rush to our military defence if we can't even defend our own free speech?
Yeah. What you want an ambassador over there that has got about a handicap of a single figure golfer, right? Yeah. That'd be the first thing I'd want. Yeah. Single figure, right? Good at talking.
So that rules Tony Abbott.
That's right. Yeah, Tony's not a good golfer, sort of thing, right? You'd have to do a quick, quick learning thing, right? Yeah. But you'd want to be able to get on the phone to Trump. You also want someone that Trump knows he's aligned with. And the other thing I'd be saying, if you're the Prime Minister, look, President Trump, we've learned from, and especially how J.D. Vance has been so strong on free speech. Imagine if you said, look, I tell you what, how about you're talking these steel tariffs? You know what? We love the way that J.D. Vance is advocating for freedom of speech around the world. If you can give us a break on these tariffs on the steel, how about if our nation will advocate for a referendum to put a protection on free speech equivalent to your US First Amendment? We'll have a vote on that, right? And we're gonna take the US First Amendment and we're going to insert it in the Australian Constitution, right? I reckon you'd get a deal.
Well, see, Craig, you as a libertarian think in pragmatic terms, practical outcomes. It's not the it's not the good intentions that matter with you, it's the outcomes. And a First Amendment to the Australian Constitution would be, 125 years overdue.
Well, look, I've changed my view on this. I was sort of like, I thought about this in the past, and all these legal experts would go, look, yes, there's these implied protections of political communication that are there in the community, right? Bugger that. I don't want anything implied. I want it written in black and white, right? That the government cannot come in and take away my freedom of speech and cannot put laws in to suppress freedom of speech. And what have we had? We've had that mis and disinformation bill, right? Exactly. And luckily, it was only just through a fluke of luck that they delayed putting it through the Senate. And it was hundreds and thousands of people wrote to their senators and said, we don't want you to pass this. And somehow or other, we flipped senators that would have normally backed that in a click of their fingers, and we beat it, I think, by 1 or 2 votes. Right? But then there was the hate speech legislation. Right? If you read through that, it is an absolute abomination. It criminalises political free speech in this country. Exactly. I don't think most Australians have read through the legislation and realise how bad it actually is. You can now go to jail for 5 years. And they took away the good faith provision. So if you could say something, a political comment, you can make it in good faith, you can mean no harm, but if it's interpreted by one of these so-called protected groups, which includes groups of political opinion, and they fear, and it's not fear of physical violence, it's just they fear force might be used against them, and force has no definition, which is, again, a very low bar and a very low broad bar, right? That's all it needs, and you can they can arrest you and go to jail for 5 years.
Let me outline my understanding of that legislation. It was that if you recklessly potentially incite violence against someone based on they're followed by the usual shopping list of identity politics,
plus political opinion. Yes,
exactly. Right. So, but at that point, you're hearing alarm bells because it's all hypothetical. So something you say that is in disagreement with someone else politically can be interpreted by a prosecutor and possibly a judge to not to have incited violence, but to have potentially and recklessly, not intentionally, but just potentially recklessly incited violence, you're off to jail.
Yeah, so it's not inciting violence, right? It's a lower bar. It's actually the perception in the mind of the person
not
in one of those protected groups that they fear. And it's not just physical violence. They put the words force or violence in there. So remember, force can be moral force. Force can be intellectual force, right? Force can just be sort of like a stern look. So it's not. They've strengthened it far beyond physical violence, and it's not inciting it, right? It's if it is in the mind of what they call a reasonable person within one of those so-called protected groups, which includes groups of political opinion.
So, Craig, you've been in Canberra, for how many years did you spend in Canberra?
12.
12 years.
Yeah.
Okay, so the outsider's interpretation of that. The standard outsider's interpretation of that legislation that almost made it through our parliament is that it is authoritarian politicians using the cover of racial tension in the community to extend their control over the electorate.
So you got two. You got the mis and disinformation bill. You got the hate speech legislation. Now, the mis and disinformation bill was defeated. Now, is Mr. Albanese going to bring that back? That's another story, right? But the hate speech bill was rushed. That's now law of this country.
Right.
Yeah. It was rushed through in record time. They allowed an hour for debate in the Senate. So we got 76 senators, and the Liberal and Labor Party got together and said, this is so important, we're going to rush it through. We're going to have 1 hour of debate. So each senator had like 50-something seconds to make a contribution to the debate. Wow. It was just a complete farce. And now we find out only this week that the whole thing was based on just it had to be rushed through because there was this caravan of explosives that was going to blow up half of Sydney, and there was all this anti-Semitic graffiti, even though they couldn't spell Israel correctly, and they got the Nazi symbol back to front, right? They paid some dumb-wit criminal to go and do it that couldn't even find Israel on a map or spell the word, right? Yeah. He was the one doing it. He'd been paid to do it, right? We know that the caravan plot was a hoax. Some idiot tried to set fire to a preschool in the morning, right? But this was all a hoax. It was a false flag.
But, Craig, okay, so that was the false flag that sort of spurred Parliament to act. But within 2 weeks of that, the hate speech legislation passing, we did have the 2 nurses at Bankstown Hospital clearly breaking this new law.
Well, that was arguable whether they did or not, right?
Pretty hateful what they said.
Oh, look, it was, but this is the thing is, I don't think that captures their conduct during. I don't want to defend these people. Absolutely abhorrent of what they said. You know, they should be kicked out of their jobs.
Okay, so the point I'm trying to make is, I watched the debate in the House of Reps about this legislation, and it was so sort of emotional that it was actually a bit nauseating.
Because it was based upon hate was permeating so much out in our society. People had filled caravans with explosives to go and blow up a synagogue, and people were targeting places with horrible, there was horrible people out there so full of hate they were graffitiing buildings. We know now this was all, as the police said, a criminal conspiracy. And what we also know, as Mr. Albanese admitted the other day, that he said he knew, the police said they knew immediately, or almost immediately, right? But they let it go through Parliament, and Parliament were debating as though, rushing this law through, as this was all factual things that happened. Now we have Mr. Albanese admitting that he knew early about this was all false flags and hoax, and yet he didn't say anything when that law was being passed through Parliament, and that was being given the reason for it was. I'd just say Mr. Dutton should be on the phone today or in the media today saying, look, this was passed because of false information. The Prime Minister knew it was false information at the time. Or if we go through the Hansard and look at the debates, all the people talking about in the House of Reps were bringing this issue up about why they had to pass the legislation. I'd say go back, this legislation should be repealed. We should repeal this legislation before Parliament sits because it was passed on a false flag. But
can I just return to my original question? Is this really, the cynical outsider's interpretation of this is that this is our politicians joining, both sides of politics, joining forces to impose more sensorial control over the population. Is that a cynical interpretation or not?
No, it's not. And remember, this type of legislation would not see the light of day if it was in the USA because of their First Amendment provisions. A government could not legislate in the way that this Australian government is doing. So now when it comes to debates online, as an Australian, we're now second-class citizens. So there's certain things that Americans are free to say, but if Australian says it, we can be locked up. They can come round to our house, arrest us, and lock us up, and give us a 5-year jail sentence.
And they showed during COVID that they're perfectly happy to do that.
Right. Now, what you'll find no action will be taken on these laws until after the election, because they won't want any. The laws are in place now. They've been in place since that got passed. I think it was in early January, early Feb, right? Yep. Nothing has happened. There hasn't been any mention, no prosecution, no action. They'll wait till after the election because they don't want people to realise how intrusive these laws are.
That's frightening.
Absolutely it is. To think in this country now, right?
So, but this is the democratic process. Like, they are waiting till after the election before they reveal what sort of people they are.
Well, let me say something. There's a speech I gave an example to talk the other way. Sir Robert Menzies gave a speech in the 1950s, down in Hurstville, my old home territory, right? Yeah. And he said something like, we will give the communists a thrashing, right? Now, let's just say on your program, right? we're going to give the Greens oh, be careful what I say. This is just an example. So we don't have the police coming on. Right? This is just an example, right? This is not actually right. Say if we said just as an example, right? We're going to give the Greens a thrashing, right? We're sick and tired of the way they run their policies. They're driving the country into the ground. We're going to give them a thrashing at this next election, right? Now, a thrashing is the threat of force, right? Being a Green is a group distinguished by its political opinion. So if someone in that Green that's considered a reasonable person, now how you find a reasonable person that's a Green is another story, but right, it's a reasonable person amongst the group, even though the entire group could be unreasonable. So you find an average person in that group that says, oh, I heard on the Fred Paul show that they were going to give us a thrashing, and I fear, right? And fear is only just an apprehension. So say, I have an apprehension they might use force against me. 5 years in jail, Fred. Go down here in the morning, right? You're to knock on the door at 5 o'clock in the morning. The police have heard you've got police online monitoring what's been said on these podcasts. You're in breach of you're arrested for hate speech, and you say, hang on, I didn't really mean we're going to give the Greens a thrashing. It was just figuratively speaking. So, you're reckless. There's no good faith provision in the law now. You recklessly said that. We found someone from a group that was a political opinion, the Greens. They have apprehension for their fear. You're gone.
All these laws only go one way, don't they?
Well,
because we had an example last night, the night before last, in Box Hill in Victoria. Penny Wong attended a public town hall, or I think they call it a Chinese town hall.
I saw it.
White people weren't allowed.
That's right.
That's racist.
You will firstly see these laws, as we've seen in the UK, they'll be applied, what was it, two-tier Kia they call him over there? Yeah. There'll be two-tier policing. Yeah. You know the way they'll be policed. They'll all be policed to, if someone on the conservative, libertarian side of politics, something, bang, you're gone, right? But on the left side of politics, no difference. Just forget that.
Well, you can't be racist towards white people.
Yeah, look, but you saw, I just saw that a couple of pictures they're taken last night, and the Labor Party, there's Penny Wong standing at the lectern, and the lectern has got all Chinese language on it. And all the signs have got all Chinese language. Now, where are we in this country where a political party has an exclusive event for one race of people and has signs all in a foreign language?
That's not what multiculturalism is meant to be.
Well, certainly not. And this is like, and Labor got this up, building Australia's future. Well, I ask, what future are Labor building for us? Yeah. And remember, the one thing about the Labor Party on this, they are brilliant at ethnic politics. Yeah. Absolutely brilliant at dividing these groups into little ethnic groups and giving them flicking them a few crumbs and coming up with taxpayers' money for them, and picking out the chief organisers of the few of the chief people in each group, giving them a few dollars to keep everyone in town. Look, I saw it with the Vietnamese community out. So when I was the member for Hughes, my first term, the northern boundary of my electorate, the northwest boundary, was Cabramatta Creek. Oh, okay. So I had Liverpool. Yeah. So the next suburb up was Cabramatta. So if my electorate moved, there's redistribution coming up. So if my electorate moved north, I was going to be the member for Cabramatta, right? So I thought, hang on a minute, look, okay, I've got to go. I can't wait for the redistribution because it was likely you're looking at how the redistribution can go. I think all the seats down south, like down the south coast, have got to get bigger, so that's going to push everything up. So it's almost certain I'm going to be the member for Cabramatta. So I've got to go to every darn Vietnamese event that I can go to, right? And I'd go to these events out in Fairfield and places like this, and Cabramatta, and there'd be a dozen Labor members there, and I'm the only Liberal. And the Vietnamese are up there.
You mean Labor candidates?
No, I mean Labor MPs. Oh. And Labor MPs and councillors
from outside
the legislature. So they had the Vietnamese had put on a big function sort of thing. They'd invite MPs from all over Sydney, right, to come along. All the Liberal MPs wouldn't give a stuff about going, right? So all the Labor MPs would go because they're brilliant at playing ethnic politics. I'm the only Liberal there. Now remember, I went to one and Barry O'Farrell was there with the as the Premier. It was Barry O'Farrell and myself. And he said to me, I can't get any of our Liberal blokes to go here. Thank goodness you're here. You're the only person here. But anyhow, the point I'm making, you go to these events, and these Vietnamese people waving the anti-communist flag and talking about freedom and the strength of family and, right, all the things that the Labor Party are against. And I said to these guys, you're all supporting the wrong party. I'm saying, if you look at your values and how you fled communism, how you fled totalitarianism, right? It's, as you see in the US, a lot of the Vietnamese community are very close along with the Republicans. Here in Australia, the Labor Party have been so good at this ethnic politics that they've got the Vietnamese community, who should be natural conservative Liberal voters, to all vote Labor.
That's pretty clever politics.
Oh, well, that's the one thing
and
Labor...
they keep doing it. I mean, these 12,000 that Mark Butler and Jason Clare sort of sidled up to.
12,000. Just think what it's going to be at the subsequent election. Now, we've had 1.4... was it about...
Well, let me just explain for the viewers, and that is that recently there was a citizenship ceremony rushed through in marginal electorates in Western Sydney, and senior ministers from the federal Labor government attended to shake hands with the new Australian citizens and ingratiate themselves to the party that is supposedly on their side. So yeah, you're saying, so this was 12,500 people they brought into the country in 3 days. It's probably still going
gave
on
them
now.
citizenship in 3 days.
But what are you saying?
Well, what I'm saying is, okay, just you think 12,000 is a lot, right? In the first 2 years of the Labor government, they brought in 1.4 million people into this country. Right? We had 400,000 people leave. We had 1.4 million come in, which was a net million increase. Now, their budget, they only budgeted for 235,000 in their budget papers for each year. So they were double what their original budget estimates came in, right? Now, that 1.4 million people, they have to be here for 4 years and they qualify for citizenship and to vote. So that means at the subsequent election coming up, which would be 2028, you're going to have an extra 1.4 million people that came in under the Labor Party in 2022, 2023 that are all eligible to vote.
So is that why they extended... When you're an Indian student in Australia, and God knows there's plenty of them, previously you were allowed to stay, after you graduated, you were allowed to stay for 2 years, if I'm not mistaken, and just recently they extended that to 8. So is that guaranteed?
Yeah, so if you've had a visa, a legitimate visa, and you've been in the country for 4 years, you can apply for citizenship.
It's guarantee you get it?
Well, I think if you've been a criminal or something, but there's very few.
Even then,
there's very few they'd knock back, right?
Yeah.
So it's 4 years that you need to be here for, right? So what I'm saying is, the Labor Party brought in ethnic politics. They brought 1.4 million people into the country in the first 2 year period of their government. That the majority of them will be eligible to vote in the subsequent election, right? And the majority of them are going to probably be voting Labor because of Labor's brilliance in ethnic politics, as you saw the other night with that thing of the Chinese. It's what's in the best interests of the Labor Party holding power.
Not in the country.
Rather than the best interests of the country. You see that with Kevin Rudd. What's in the best interests of the country? Kevin Rudd gets recalled, right? Do they do that? No, because it's more important to look after your Labor mates. Right? If you're looking after the best interests of the country, you would not bring 1.4 million people into the place. That's done because they've got to boost up the figures to try and doctor the figures to show there's been GDP growth.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Even though GDP capita is declining, right? If you don't want the headline of the economy's gone backwards, that's a killer. So again, people don't fully understand it, right? So you can't have GDP going backwards. So as the economy goes backwards, all these crazy net zero policies, what do? Let's bring more people in.
So what's going to happen in the Senate, Craig? Do you think the centre-right parties will hold the balance?
Look, I would. It's going to be tough, and again, because remember we've got 6 senators from each state, 2 from the Northern Territory, and 2 from the ACT. Now, what's tricky about the ACT is at the last election, they had one Labor. So it used to be one. So the Liberals used to have to need about 35% of the vote to get one senator in. Right? So normally they were just above that 35% threshold. So all through, as long as I can remember, it was the two senators from the ACT were one Labor, one Liberal, right? But the last election, they cleverly ran David Pocock, right? The ex-rugby player, who was very green, very left, right? He's probably to the left of the Greens on many things, right?
He is,
but he had the prestige, and of course the media and the ABC gave him millions of dollars worth of free publicity, right?
Yeah.
And he actually got ahead of the Greens, got all the Green preferences, and just pipped the Liberal Party. So we had two, if you want to say, from the left side of politics, right? So that all of a sudden throws the entire balance of the parliament out. Now again, this is how sneaky the Labor Party are. They've had a massive increase in the number of public servants in Canberra. They've boosted the public servants in Canberra. Now most of those public servants in Canberra, who do you reckon they're going to vote for?
Yeah, well,
right?
they all voted yes in the referendum.
Yes, so they've gerrymandered the ACT, filling it up with all these public servants. So I think it's going to be almost impossible for the Liberal Party to win that seat back. So you'll have this mismatch. So normally you'll get 3 from the left, 3 from the right in each state, right?
Yeah.
Okay. But also you've got this mismatch now of the ACT where they're going to have 2 from the left side of politics. So even for the Liberals to balance that out, they've got to find one state where you can have 4, say, people from the right and 2 people from the left. And that's very difficult to get. It happened in Queensland a couple of years ago. But you've got to have a massive, massive victory for one side, for the Liberals or the Coalition, to get that 4th senator up, so it's a 4-2 split. So with that, it's going to be very difficult for me to see how the Conservative side of Conservative, Libertarian, freedom, whatever you want to call it, is actually going to have the balance of power in the Senate.
Do you agree, though, that the Australian electorate roughly divides 60% Conservative and 40% left?
Look, I think that's probably overestimated the Conservative vote. I think one thing that we are seeing, there's less and less people supporting the major parties.
Yeah.
I think that has been a long-term trend going downwards.
But the reason I ask, though, is that, Australians still are, despite what's happened over the past, say, 20 years, Australians are still, reasonable, hardworking, independent, conservative, mostly Christian people. But we can't get a government to reflect that.
Yeah, look, I think take that Q&A program the other night.
Yeah.
Right? They had a guy on there that said that, look, the hard-working guy said, I've got a young family, I'm working 2 jobs, right? I can't afford, if I've just had a big rent increase, if it goes up again...
$10,000 a year.
Yeah, if it goes up again, I'm on the streets. He said, I've got nowhere to go. He would be a typical Labor Party voter. Right? Over the years, the Labor have gone, we're for the working class. We look after the working men and women of the country. That was the fundamental basis of the Labor Party, right? That ain't the Labor Party today. Right?
Well, you could tell by the way Jason Clare responded to that question, and I'll put the clip into this video.
Yeah.
But
so it was not Jason Clare. It was South Australia Health Minister.
Oh, okay.
Mark Butler.
I recently got a rent increase notice for an additional $180 a week, which works out to be about 10 grand a year. I tried to find a cheaper place and there just aren't any. What little is available, there's dozens of people lined up. Lots of them are immigrants and they have plenty more money than I can possibly get. I'm already working 2 jobs. 1 more rent increase, and my family, my 1-year-old baby, we're facing homelessness and we've got nowhere to go. My family's already been forced out of Sydney for the same reasons. I want to know, is the government going to cut immigration to match housing availability, or are we just going to keep going until every regular working Australian is homeless?
I'm so sorry you're going through that, and it's a story we all hear right across the country, obviously particularly in the biggest states around the biggest cities. We have been working very hard to get migration levels, immigration levels down to something we think the country can manage. And
Complete gaslighting. I hope you get like when he said, we're working really hard to get migration down. Bullshit.
Yes.
Bullshit, right? Complete and utter bullshit, right? As I said before, Labor, the numbers were Labor's very first budget that they put out, in the budget papers themselves, they put out what the Treasury estimates with the migration rate, right? They had for their first year, 2022, 2023, 235,000. And for the next year, 2023, 2024, 235,000. So the first 2 years, they had in their own budget papers, right? This was in, I think, September or October of 2022. They had budgeted for 470,000 people coming into the country. The number was over 1 million. They doubled. They had a more than 100% increase of what was in the budget. Now, we haven't yet got a good handle on the data because, the data, the ABS doesn't report it accurately. It doesn't get reported in time. So we really haven't got a good handle on the data of what is in the second half of 2024.
But this is like those censorship laws. The average punter can only speculate what the true motivation of all this is. What do you think?
I'll tell you, look, firstly, the true motivation is that the economy would be in recession, right? There would be a GDP, total economy size recession if we didn't have these huge rates of migration. Now, it doesn't really matter. It's on paper, it looks good. It's the paper over. They don't want the headline that there's this going to be a terrible... Was it recession? Isn't that bad? No government has ever won when there's a recession going on. So they say, we've got to, whatever we do, we can't have the headline of recession. We've got to import more and more people into the country. So the more people you bring into the country, just like you avoid a recession, let's annex the South Island of New Zealand. And we bring the South Island of New Zealand into the Australian economy. Oh, look how much the Australian economy's grown, right?
But aren't there global forces at work as well?
Well, look, you see huge rates of migration. Australia's not unique in this situation. You've seen it in Canada, right? You've also seen it in many European countries where they've got problems with the illegal migration. So it's happening. You saw it in the US where the Biden administration basically opened the borders. Said, come on in, fellas, right? Yeah. Come on in, here's some money along the way and here's a mobile phone and here's some accommodation and, and get on the phone and bring your cousins and brothers and tell them to come as well.
Yeah.
It is a globe, but particularly with Australia, to me it is clearly because they didn't want to have the headline of a GDP recession.
Right.
And also I think the extra bonuses, they know that because they're far better than the Conservatives at playing ethnic politics, that this will help their vote in the years to come.
So what
bugger the poor bloke, like that poor guy on Q&A the other night, a typical hard-working Aussie working class bloke, right, that traditionally would have been a Labor Party voter. The Labor Party are now basically shitting on the guy.
So what we need in Parliament, Craig, is, more people who have life experience outside politics like yourself. I'm going to spring this on you, but today is Trent's birthday.
Yesterday was Trent's birthday.
Yesterday was Trent's birthday. Tell me about Trent.
Look, Trent's 29.
Yeah.
So his 29th birthday. Trent was born, when he was born, he was premature. Yeah. And we didn't think he'd make it. The doctors didn't think he'd make it through I remember the doctor saying, Vicky said, look, this baby's in distress, we've got to do an emergency Caesar. Right? So they rushed her off to hospital, had the emergency Caesar, and he was hooked up to, he's premature and small, hooked up to all his tubes and bits and pieces and things, and we didn't think he'd see out the first 24 hours. That's how it was. Anyhow, then they did some tests and they found he had Down syndrome as well. So that was a pretty hard blow to take. And look, when he's little, he was progressing well. He was starting to say a few words, and then he had his routine sort of vaccines, and didn't think anything about it. Just do it right, and he never spoke a word since.
Wow. So it's been a tough 29
So
years.
So that's one of the great reasons why I was very suspicious about the vaccines, because I've seen it with my own son, how he actually regressed. The people say, the vaccines don't cause it. Then he was autistic, right? So the vaccines don't cause autism. Well, you know, I saw it with my own eyes how my son regressed significantly after he had his vaccines, right? And went from being able to speaking words and doing signals and bits and things and just, right, to saying nothing.
So you've had a personal experience of how insidious and pernicious the medical industry can be, and then you saw COVID come around.
Yeah, look, I sort of something that, you know, you think, what can you do about it? You can't change. You know, there's no cure for autism. There's no cure for Down syndrome. This is what it is, and you have to accept it and look at the glass as being half full or a third full, rather than, you know, 2/3 empty, and enjoy every minute that you've got, sort of thing. But it made me, and I thought, okay, well, let's say if it was the vaccines, what can I do about it? And you'd read, and there's all these so-called medical experts telling you that you're wrong, right? And I think, okay, well, maybe some kids have to be sacrificed for the greater good of the vaccine. You know, I'm trying to rationalise it in my own mind, right? I say that's correct, right? So when the COVID shots came around, right, and they said, hang on, this is a brand new experimental technology that we haven't used before, and it's, instead of like injecting a sort of a bit of the, you know, basic inert virus into your body, right, and it stays in the deltoid, and, you know, that creates the T cell. Now this actually goes through all your body, every cell in your body, with a messenger RNA wrapped in a lipid nanoparticle, and that tricks the cells in your body to producing the spike protein. And this is all experimental stuff. I'm going, hang on a minute. Hang on, like, you know, this like should have been alarm bells ringing, like, you know, like these giant sirens going, like warning, you know, like was old Lost in Space with, you know, Dr. Smith with the arms going, danger, Will Robinson, danger, right? Yeah. That's what it was like to me. And then the more you read, the more you was, hang on a minute, this is all complete BS. And then you're thinking, am I living in some insane asylum? The way everyone went, oh, you know, it was, the vaccines were like better than sliced bread. That's how they were perceived in the community. And anyone that questioned them was, you know, tin hat foil wearer, you know, anti-vaxxer sort of thing, as these terrible, you know, accusations and slander, and the data and the science was thrown out the window.
I get the feeling that we are sleepwalking into an election that isn't going to talk about this subject, even though it's fundamental to our democracy. But I get the feeling that we are sleepwalking into another crisis that the government creates and imposes on us. What do you think?
Well, look, if you look at the policies that are harming Australia at the moment, right? We saw the freedom of speech harming Australia based on a false flag. We saw the COVID policies, right, based on false information, based on scare campaigns. Remember the original scenes coming out of people falling over in the streets, you know, just standing there and falling dead, right? We now know they're all actors. Huh? Scare campaigns. We know they dodged up the numbers. It was a COVID death, right? So anyone that had a whiff of COVID, right, you could be not 103 and die of being old age. Oh no, that's a COVID death sort of thing, and they admitted that now. They boosted up. So you had that. Then you've got the nonsense of this net zero, and this climate complete hoax scam, right? Which we are destroying our economy on. We're pushing up the price of electricity. We're destroying manufacturing in this country, right? Based on what is other than a complete and utter nonsense. And we have 1% of the world's total CO2 emissions, and we're closing down our coal-fired power stations while China's opening by the hundreds.
Can I add another to that list, though? It's Ukraine. I mean, Ukraine's another
that's right.
Another case of mass formation psychosis.
Look, it is not 1939, right? We are now dealing with a nuclear armed nations, right? Russia has like thousands of nuclear warheads right now. So it is a different type of negotiation, right? You can't go around as, oh yes, be bellied, we fight, do this, right?
Yeah. We'll do whatever it takes.
We'll
however long it takes is
okay. Can you give me an ironclad guarantee that Putin won't wake up one day if he feels threatened and press a button? Can you give me that?
Yeah.
Mr. Albanese, can you give me that ironclad guarantee? Is that Putin's such a bad man? Right? What, it's 99% sure it won't happen. Hang on. So there's a 1% chance you're going to risk blowing up the world.
But the whole thing is based on the idea that Ukraine represents democratic freedom and Russia represents the new empire. And both of those premises are false.
And you're arguing over where the border should be on the Donbass.
Yeah.
Now, I would ask, let's go out and ask these politicians, let's give them a map of the world and say, okay, guys, draw me the current border of where the Donbass is, right? Yeah. How do you reckon you go? Do you reckon anything to be able to draw it on just a plain map? Just give me an unmarked map. You show me where the Donbass region is and where you think the border belongs, right? The Crimea, these areas have changed between one despot and warlord for thousands and thousands of years.
And it's got
the
nothing,
borders have
that's
gone
got
backwards.
nothing to do with Australia.
It's got nothing to do with Australia, right? Why we are involved in it, and the potential risk of, and you see it in President Trump when he talks about this. The potential risk, I think, of a nuclear war is not of someone waking up in the morning saying, I'm going to press this button. The potential risk, I think, is a miscalculation. Right? Humans make mistakes. Right? We're not infallible creatures.
Well, can I just outline a bigger threat? And historically, it's probably got more precedence than actual conflict. And that is that most civilizations die from within. And Craig, not to sound a pessimist, I mean, I know John Ruddock wasn't impressed with my pessimism last week, but I think Australia is dying from within.
Well, I hate to say that, I think there's a lot of truth to that. I think where we see it is the worst thing that this Albanese government has done is this mass migration that has allowed housing prices to go off the chain. Right? So if I'm a young kid in school, if I'm in year 9 or 10 or 11 or 12, and I'm thinking about what will I do in my future, I'm sort of thinking, well, how much does this cost? How much does that cost? I look at a Porsche or a Ferrari and think, okay, I can't get that, but okay, thinking how much can I buy the hottest car I can find, right? Or
a Holden Barina in your case.
Yeah, that's right. Or how can I get the top car and okay, I'd like to buy a house. Where can I buy? How much? And they look at, hang on, $1 million. I can't buy anything. And okay, how much I have to buy a house for $1 million? They do something. I've got a $200,000 deposit, and then I've got to borrow $800,000. And they just go,
yeah, how can you meet the repayments on that?
right, I can't do it.
Yeah. So there's no future.
Stuff it.
Yeah.
Stuff it. I can't do it. So I think I'm never going to own a part of Australia, right? So how does your loyalty to your country, if you don't own a part of your country, right? If you're just, I think you can only ever rent, what does that do to your loyalty to your country, right? What does it do to your desire to be, to work hard and to save, right, for tomorrow? If I've got no hope of saving and buying a house. You change the mindset and the culture of the society, and when I say change it, you change it dramatically for the worse. And that's what I fear is happening in Australia today. A whole generation of kids are basically saying, stuff it, why bother? I'll go out on the weekend, I'll enjoy, I'll get on the drugs, I'll give the drugs a try, I'll get on the whatever spirits I can or whatever, because I've got no hope of saving, so why even bother trying?
How do you turn that around?
Well, firstly, what we've got to you've got to install an entrepreneurial spirit in the kids, and you've got to make sure that that they can see that they can achieve. Right? The first thing we should do is we should be cutting all this woke nonsense out of the schools. Right? Take one job. I would love to write the curriculum for the schools. Right? Teach the kids teach the kids about, the history of Western civilization, right? Teach the kids about how wealth was created, right? None of the kids, they just think the wealth is like a fixed pie and you only argue how you cut it up, right? And as you're arguing how you're cutting up, the pie is shrinking all the time. You've got to work out how you can expand. And the size of the economic pie shrinks and expands, depends on the cleverness of our society, right? That's what you need to encourage. So firstly, how do you do it? You've got to take a chainsaw to government, right? As I see all these positions in look, you get down to Canberra, there's hundreds of bureaucrats, hundreds of them, on salaries of $500,000 or more. So if I was a young kid, why would you bother going out starting your own business? You'd say, look, get into the public service and suck up, right? Don't ever question your boss, or just whatever the narrative is, go along with the narrative and suck up, and you'll get one of these highly paid bureaucracies. Right? That's the way to do it. Right? Instead of going actually adding value in society and community, get in the public service and suck up. That's what you. This is why. So you got to have a complete. Was it doge?
Yeah.
A complete culling of the public service, right? I said Human Rights Commission. What's Millet's words? Afura, is it? Afura, right. Department of Education. Why do we have a Department of Education in Canberra and state departments of education? Right. All this duplication and waste. I saw it down there in Canberra. You just look, honestly. If most people knew the waste and the over expenditure in Canberra, the small businesses that I work with and guys that were in the trades and bits and pieces, they would vomit if they knew what it was like. So you've got to cull the bureaucracy, right? Secondly, you've got to bring the housing prices under control. Mm-hmm. You've got to give a young Australian kid the opportunity to own his own home. Now, I think the only way we can do that is we've got to strengthen our regional areas of this country. Right? We've got to make it viable that if you're a young person living in Sydney, right, that you can go and move out to a regional centre, and you have good transport links between Sydney and these other areas, that you can go and get a block of land or half an acre of land, right? I would be looking at moving a lot of the existing bureaucracies out of the city to these regional areas. That frees up places in the cities, right?